She dared me to be a girl for 24 hours. Now I don't want to go back. I never thought something as silly as a dare could change me this much. It started on a Friday night when my best friend Lily and I were hanging out at her apartment. We always teased each other about random things, and she knew I wasn't the type to back down from a challenge. We were playing one of those truth or dare games that somehow always spirals into something unexpected. She leaned forward with that mischievous smile she gets and said, "I dare you to be a girl for 24 hours. I laughed at first because it sounded ridiculous, but she didn't back down. She crossed her arms and said, "Come on, I'll help you, but you have to really commit. Clothes, makeup, the whole thing." I rolled my eyes, but deep down I felt a strange mix of nervousness and curiosity, maybe because I'd never even considered what it would feel like. I thought it would just be funny, a chance for her to laugh at me and for me to prove I could take a dare like always. The next morning, she showed up at my place with bags of clothes, shoes, and makeup. She looked more excited than I'd ever seen her. She spread everything out on my bed: dresses, skirts, tops, wigs, jewelry, heels, everything. It looked like a complete transformation kit. My stomach twisted seeing all of it, because suddenly it wasn't just a joke anymore. She was serious. I almost backed out, but then she said, "What's wrong? Scared? You'll actually look good." Her voice had that playful sting in it, and I couldn't let her win, so I said, "Fine, let's do it." She started with the basics: shaving my face, shaping my eyebrows, not too much, but enough to soften my look. Then she pulled out this foundation and started applying it. The brush strokes against my skin felt strangely calming, like I was being painted into someone new. She blended everything so carefully. My features began to shift right before my eyes. She handed me a mirror halfway through, and I barely recognized myself. My skin looked smooth, my eyes sharper, my lips fuller. She smiled and said, "Wait till we're done." The real shock came with the wig. She had chosen a long dark brown wig that flowed past my shoulders. She adjusted it on my head, brushed it out, and suddenly it was like a stranger staring back at me, except it wasn't a stranger, it was me, but softer, prettier, almost too real. Lily squealed, clapping her hands. "You look gorgeous." I tried to laugh it off, but when I looked again at the mirror, my chest tightened because a small part of me agreed. Then came the clothes. She had picked out a simple outfit first: a light blue skirt and a fitted white blouse. She helped me step into everything, adjusting it so it hugged my body in ways I wasn't used to. I felt exposed, but also strangely complete. She added a padded bra and some shaping garments that completely transformed my silhouette. When I stood up, my body no longer looked like mine. It looked like hers, or at least like it belonged to some girl I didn't know, but somehow wanted to. Walking in heels was another challenge. She made me practice pacing back and forth across the room. At first, I stumbled, nearly twisting my ankle. She laughed, but encouraged me, holding my hand until I got the rhythm. Once I managed a few confident steps, she nodded proudly and said, "You're starting to move like one too." And she was right. My hips swayed slightly, my posture straightened. Every little movement felt different, like I was slipping deeper into this role without even trying. By the time she finished the final touches, eyeliner, mascara, lipstick, I was staring at a girl in the mirror, not a parody, not a costume, but a convincing girl. My jaw went slack. I whispered, "Is that really me?" And she grinned. "That's all you, babe." She made me spin around, checking the outfit from every angle, and I felt a heat rise in my chest. That wasn't embarrassment. It was something else, something closer to excitement. Then came the real dare. She said, "Remember, you have to live like this for 24 hours, not just here. We're going out." I panicked at the thought people would see me, strangers would look at me, but she insisted this was the dare, and I had to commit. So reluctantly, I agreed. The first test was stepping outside. Every nerve in my body screamed that people would know, but as we walked down the street, nobody stared. The few people who glanced at me didn't look twice, as if I really was just another girl passing by. That realization hit me harder than I expected. It was both terrifying and liberating. We went to a cafe first, ordering drinks. I tried to keep my voice steady, softer than usual, and the barista didn't even flinch, just smiled and asked for my name. I gave Lily's suggestion, Emily, and hearing it spoken aloud with my drink felt strangely right, like it belonged to me more than my real name ever had. I kept repeating it in my head, Emily, Emily, Emily. The hours passed with us shopping, trying on more clothes, laughing as she picked outfits for me. I should have felt embarrassed, but instead I felt alive. Every time I caught my reflection in the changing room mirror, I felt like I was peeling away layers of myself I didn't even know existed. There was a lightness of freedom, as if I was finally stepping into something I had been missing all along. But the real emotional twist came later that evening when we met some of Lily's friends. She hadn't told them about the dare. She introduced me simply as Emily, one of her cousins. I froze inside, terrified they'd see through me. But they didn't. They welcomed me, talked with me, treated me like any other girl. I found myself laughing, joining their conversations. And for the first time, I wasn't performing, I wasn't pretending. It felt natural, too natural. By the time we got back to her place, I was exhausted but glowing. She asked how I felt, and I hesitated. I wanted to say it was fun, and I was ready to go back to normal, but the word stuck in my throat. Instead, I admitted it feels good, like really good. She smiled knowingly and said, I thought you might say that. When midnight struck, the 24 hours were technically over. She offered to help me take everything off, but I found myself stalling. I didn't want to. I kept running my fingers through the wig, touching the skirt, smoothing the blouse, as if holding on to a version of myself I wasn't ready to lose. I finally confessed, I don't think I want to go back, not yet, maybe not ever. The next morning I woke up still dressed as Emily. I looked in the mirror expecting to feel regret, but instead I felt peace for the first time in my life. It wasn't just a dare anymore, it was a discovery, a revelation. I had found someone inside me I never knew was there, someone I didn't want to let go of. Now days have passed, and Emily feels more real than the old me ever did. I don't know where this journey will end, but I know one thing for certain: the dare that started as a joke has become the most important turning point of my life. She dared me to be a girl for 24 hours, and now I don't want to go back. The morning after that dare, something inside me felt different. It was as if I had crossed a threshold that I couldn't step back from. I sat at Lily's vanity, brushing out the wig she had styled for me the night before, sunlight spilling through her window, and I couldn't stop staring at the reflection in the mirror. Emily looked back at me with sleepy eyes and smudged makeup, but she still felt more like me than the boy I had been only a day earlier. Lily came in holding 2 mugs of coffee and grinned. When she saw me still in full outfit, "You didn't take it off," she said, almost like she already knew the answer. I shook my head quietly and whispered, "I didn't want to." She sat beside me, handed me the mug, and placed her other hand over mine, and for a moment I felt both terrified and safe, because someone else could see me, the real me. We spent that morning talking about what it meant. Lily asked me questions I didn't know how to answer. Do you feel more comfortable like this? Do you want to keep exploring it? Is this who you've been hiding all along? And I kept trying to explain, but the words tangled up inside me. It wasn't that I had always known, but it also wasn't just a costume anymore. It was as if I had been given a chance to breathe differently, and now I couldn't go back to holding my breath. That afternoon, Lily insisted we go out again. She said, "You need to know if this feeling lasts beyond my apartment walls." We redid my makeup, put me in a soft lavender dress with a cardigan and flats, easier to walk in than the heels yesterday, and when we stepped out onto the street, I felt less like I was wearing a disguise and more like I was wearing myself. People walked past us without second glances, and with each step I took, as Emily, the panic faded and was replaced by a growing warmth. We went to the park this time, sitting on a bench while kids played and couples walked dogs and families picnicked around us. Lily teased me about the way I kept adjusting my hair, the way I smoothed my dress down every 5 seconds. She said, "You're acting just like any other girl who wants to look her best." And I realized she was right. It wasn't nervousness, it was pride. I wanted to look like me. Then something happened that I'll never forget. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, ran up to me and said, "I like your dress, it's so pretty." And before I could overthink, I smiled and said, "Thank you, sweetie," and she ran back to her mom. And I sat frozen, the compliment replaying in my head, my heart hammering, not from fear, but from a happiness so sharp it almost hurt, because in that moment, I wasn't pretending. That child had seen me simply as a girl and believed it, and I believed it too. Later that evening, back at Lily's, we tried more outfits, laughing and experimenting, but beneath the fun there was a seriousness in me that I couldn't ignore. I asked her quietly, "Do you think it's wrong that I feel this good about it?" She looked at me with so much gentleness and said, "There's nothing wrong about being who you are. If this makes you happy, why would that ever be wrong?" And I nearly cried, because nobody had ever given me permission like that before. When I finally went home that night, still dressed as Emily, I felt a wave of nerves again. My parents weren't home, so I didn't have to explain yet, but being in my own room like this made everything heavier. I sat at my desk staring at pictures of myself from the day Lily had taken them, and I couldn't stop looking, comparing the boy I thought I was with the girl I saw in those photos, and the truth was undeniable. Emily wasn't just some temporary dare, she was me. The next few days, I kept finding excuses to see Lily, and every time I did, I found myself slipping back into the clothes, the makeup, the wig, the name, and each time it got harder to leave it behind. The boy clothes in my closet started to feel like costumes. Instead, the way they hung stiffly on me made me uncomfortable, like I was shrinking back into something that wasn't mine anymore. I tried to tell myself it was just curiosity running wild, but the more I lived as Emily, the clearer it became. I wasn't curious, I was discovering. The suspense grew inside me, though, because I knew sooner or later I'd have to face the outside world in a bigger way. My parents, my classmates, my job, the people who thought they knew me. I was terrified of their reactions, but every time I thought about just stopping pretending it never happened, my chest tightened, as if I was locking myself back in a cage. One night, I confessed all this to Lily, my fears, my confusion, my excitement, and she listened without judgment. Then she took my hand and said, "You don't have to decide everything right now, just take one step at a time, but don't deny yourself just because you're scared. You're stronger than that." I held on to her words like a lifeline because deep down I knew she was right. The real twist came a week later when my sister unexpectedly came into my room. I had been sitting at my desk, still dressed as Emily, trying on jewelry Lily had lent me, and before I could hide anything, she froze in the doorway, staring. I panicked, my heart pounding, my face burning. I expected laughter or anger or confusion, but instead, she just whispered softly, "You look beautiful." I couldn't breathe for a moment because I hadn't expected acceptance, least of all from her. But she walked over, sat on my bed, and asked, "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" And for the first time I said it out loud, "I think I might be happier like this." She nodded slowly, smiled faintly, and said, "Then be happy." That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I knew there was no going back. Not really. The dare had ended days ago, but I hadn't taken off the role. I had grown into it until it wasn't a role anymore. It was me. And the scariest, yet most thrilling part was that the people around me could see it too, and some of them even accepted it. The suspense of what comes next still churned in my stomach, but it was mixed with hope, like maybe this wasn't the end of something, but the beginning of everything. The morning after my sister saw me, I expected everything to feel awkward, but instead she acted like nothing was wrong. She knocked on my door before school and asked, "Are you coming with me today?" And I froze, because I had been planning to avoid going, but she tilted her head and added, "You don't have to hide from me if you want to go." As "Emily, I'll walk with you." The idea made my stomach churn with nerves, but there was also a strange relief in knowing I wouldn't be alone. I hesitated, staring at the closet where my old clothes hung lifeless, and then at the lavender dress Lily had let me borrow. I chose the dress. The walk to school felt like the longest of my life. Every step, my heart raced, pounding in my chest like a drum. My sister stayed close, brushing off anyone who looked at us too long, and whispering, "You're fine, they're not staring at you the way you think they are." But to me it felt like the whole world's eyes were on me. When we finally reached the front doors, I nearly turned back, but she squeezed my hand and said, "If this is who you are, own it." And somehow I found the courage to step inside. The hallways buzzed with chatter, lockers slamming, students laughing, and for a terrifying moment, I thought someone would call me out, but instead something unexpected happened. Nobody said anything. The people I passed just moved aside like they always did, and a few even smiled at me like I belonged there. I clung to that small kindness like a shield. In class, my voice trembled when I answered questions, softer, higher than before, and though I worried it sounded forced, nobody reacted badly. One girl even leaned over to whisper, "I love your hair, where did you get it?" And I almost laughed at the absurdity that she believed it was mine. I just smiled and said thanks, brushing it behind my ear the way I had practiced with Lily. Inside, I was trembling, but outside, I was holding together, and that felt like victory. Lunch was harder, though. Sitting at a crowded table, I could feel eyes on me, whispers that might have been about me, or maybe just my imagination. My sister sat beside me, shielding me from the worst of it, but still my hands shook as I picked at my food. Then something surprising happened. One of the boys I had known for years walked over, tray in hand, and asked, "Mind if I sit here?" I nearly choked because he had never once tried to talk to me before, but now he looked at me differently, curious, maybe even admiring. I nodded slowly, and he smiled at me, and I realized with a jolt that he didn't recognize me at all. He thought I really was Emily. That realization sent me spiraling for the rest of the day. Part of me wanted to scream the truth, while another part of me basked in the freedom of being seen for who I was, not judged against the boy I used to be. When the final bell rang, I almost ran out of the building, but once we were outside, my sister laughed and said, "See, you survived." I couldn't help but laugh too, though my nerves were still buzzing. Survival had felt like a mountain, but I had climbed it. That evening, Lily came over to hear everything, and when I told her about the boy who sat with me, she burst out laughing. "Oh, Emily, you've already got an admirer." I covered my face, groaning, but deep down I couldn't stop the smile spreading across my lips. It was strange being seen this way, but also thrilling, like a door I never thought would open was suddenly wide. The next few days became a blur of balancing between two lives at home with my parents. I still wore my old clothes pretending everything was normal, but whenever I was with Lily or my sister, or even just by myself in my room, Emily came back out, and each time it got harder to tuck her away. The suspense grew. Every time I heard my parents' footsteps outside my door, afraid they'd walk in and discover me, but also wishing in some twisted way that they would, so I wouldn't have to hide anymore. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening when my mom knocked on my door and stepped inside. Without waiting, I was sitting at my desk still in a soft pink sweater dress, brushing out the wig. I froze, unable to move, as she stopped in the doorway, eyes widening. She didn't speak at first, and neither did I. The silence was suffocating. Then she finally asked very gently, "Is this you?" I couldn't find the words. I just nodded, tears pricking my eyes. She came closer, sat on the bed, and after what felt like forever, she reached out and touched my hand. She whispered, "You look happy, and that's all I care about." I broke, then sobbing into her arms while she held me, saying it's okay, over and over. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, not from fear, but from something new, acceptance. My mom hadn't rejected me. She had seen me and chosen to love me anyway. It felt like a weight lifting, 1,000 invisible chains snapping free. I realized then I didn't just want to be Emily in secret. I wanted to live as her fully, every day. The next morning I opened my closet, and for the first time, instead of seeing it as a prison of old clothes, I saw it as a canvas waiting to be filled. I picked out one of the skirts Lily had given me, paired it with a cardigan, tied my hair back neatly, and walked out of my room, not hiding, not sneaking, just being. And when my mom smiled at me at the breakfast table, like nothing was wrong, I knew this was only the beginning of a new life. The days that followed felt unreal, like I was standing on the edge of two worlds, one foot still in the life I used to know, and the other stepping firmly into Emily's life. Every morning I woke up with the same question echoing in my mind: do I dare to keep going? And every morning the answer came back: yes. I couldn't stop, even if I wanted to. My reflection in the mirror each day reminded me this wasn't some game anymore, this was me. At school, more people began to notice me, not in the way I feared, but in the way that made my chest flutter with a strange mix of excitement and fear. Girls would compliment my outfits, boys held doors open for me, teachers called me Miss without hesitation, and every time it happened, I felt myself slipping further from the boy I used to be, until he became almost like a ghost, a memory that didn't fit anymore. Of course, it wasn't all easy. There were whispers, two glances that lingered too long, a couple of kids who snickered behind my back, and for a moment the old fear surged back. Maybe I didn't belong, maybe this was too much. But then I remembered the little girl in the park who had simply said she liked my dress, without hesitation, and my mom's voice telling me, "You look happy, and that's all I care about." And I found the strength to keep walking. Lily remained my anchor. She would call me every evening asking about my day, pushing me to be braver. She even dragged me into stores I never imagined myself entering before: makeup counters, jewelry boutiques, clothing racks full of colors and fabrics that made me feel alive. I remember one day she insisted I try on a flowing green dress, and when I stepped out of the fitting room, she clapped her hands and said, "You're glowing, Emily." I blushed so hard. But in that moment, I realized she wasn't exaggerating. The girl in the mirror was glowing, and that girl was me. One afternoon, something happened that shook me more deeply than I expected. I was walking home alone when I passed a group of kids from school. I braced for the worst, but instead one of them called out, "Hey, Emily." I turned cautiously, and he just waved like it was the most normal thing in the world. My heart nearly burst, because in that simple moment my name wasn't a joke, it was real, it was accepted. But the real challenge came at home with my dad. He had been quieter than usual since my mom found out, like he was avoiding looking directly at me. One evening during dinner, I finally gathered the courage to speak. "Dad," I said softly, and he looked up, spoon halfway to his mouth. I swallowed hard. "This is who I am." His eyes narrowed, at first his jaw tightening, and I felt my stomach sink. But then, after a long silence, he set his spoon down and said, "You're still my kid, and I don't understand it yet, but I'm not going to lose you to this fear. If this makes you happy, then I'll try my best to accept it." I nearly cried right there at the table, because it wasn't perfect, but it was enough. It was more than I had dared hope for. The weeks rolled on, and Emily became less of a mask and more of a life. My teachers started calling me by my chosen name. My sister began lending me her clothes. My mom would smile proudly when we shopped together. And even my dad, though awkward sometimes, would ask, "Do you need anything for school, kiddo?" The normalcy of it all was overwhelming in the best way. I had gone from fearing every glance to embracing each new day. Yet with each step forward came deeper questions. Late at night, lying in bed, I would whisper to myself, "Is this forever? Is this who I really am?" The answer never came in words, but in feelings. The calm that settled over me whenever I brushed out my hair, the thrill of zipping up a dress, the peace in my mother's voice when she said, "Emily, could you help me set the table?" Those feelings spoke louder than any doubt. One Saturday, Lily surprised me by dragging me into a salon I had never been to before. She announced to the stylist, "We're doing something new today," and before I could protest, she had me seated in the chair, scissors, snipping, dye mixing, and 2 hours later, when the cape was finally pulled away, I stared at my reflection in shock because for the first time, I wasn't wearing a wig. My real hair had been styled, trimmed into soft layers, falling neatly around my face, and dyed the same warm brown I had loved in the wig. I reached up, touching it, trembling, and Lily grinned, saying, "Now you don't need to pretend anymore. It's really you." I couldn't stop smiling the entire walk home, the wind blowing through my hair like I was reborn. The transformation was no longer temporary, no longer a dare. The girl in the mirror was real, not because of clothes or makeup or wigs, but because she was me, and I was finally ready to admit it to myself, to everyone around me. Emily wasn't just a name or a disguise. She was the truth that had been waiting inside me all along. The more I lived as Emily, the more the old version of me felt like a fading shadow. Sometimes I try to picture myself going back, wearing the same jeans and t-shirts, cutting my hair short again, lowering my voice to sound rougher. But each time the thought left me hollow, like trying to fit into clothes that were 2 sizes too small. My body and my mind resisted. I didn't want to go back. I couldn't. At school, the whispers began to die down, replaced by a quiet acceptance. People started including me in conversations at lunch. Girls invited me to sit with them, share makeup tips, even borrow accessories. Boys treated me with an odd mix of politeness and curiosity. And though it was strange at first, I began to realize they weren't laughing at me anymore. They were adjusting to me. It was like the world was slowly shifting to make space for Emily. But with that space came challenges. One afternoon, a teacher pulled me aside after class. She looked hesitant but finally said, "I want to respect you, but the school records still have your other name. What would you like me to do?" My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't thought about things like paperwork or rules or official recognition. I swallowed hard and said softly, "Please call me Emily." She smiled and said, "Then Emily it is." And just like that, a small piece of my fear melted away. At home, things were steadier. My mom encouraged me every day, reminding me to be patient with myself. My sister was relentless in teaching me the little details about fashion and mannerisms, and even my dad, though still reserved, would sometimes surprise me with simple gestures like knocking on my door and asking, "Emily, do you want to come help me in the garage?" as if he was trying in his own way to say, "I see you, and you're still mine." One evening, Lily invited me to a small party at her cousin's place. I panicked at first because it meant stepping outside my safe circles into a world where nobody knew the story behind Emily, but she insisted, "You need to live, not hide." So I agreed. We picked out a black skirt with a silver blouse and my favorite necklace, and when I walked into that party with music pulsing and strangers laughing, something incredible happened. Nobody questioned me, nobody stared. I was just another girl in the room. People asked me my name. I said, "Emily," and they nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. I laughed, I danced, I felt free in a way I had never imagined. But freedom wasn't without its shadows. A few days later, I overheard 2 boys in the hallway whispering, "That's not really a girl, you know." My stomach dropped, the old panic threatening to drag me under. But then one of the girls who had been sitting with me at lunch turned to them and said sharply, "She's Emily, and that's all that matters." They fell silent. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone. People saw me, and some were willing to stand beside me. That meant everything. Weeks turned into months, and Emily became less of a new name and more of my only name. I started writing it at the top of my homework assignments. I signed it at the end of notes to friends. I even whispered it to myself in the mirror before bed, and each time it sounded stronger, more permanent. The boy I used to be felt like a story I had read a long time ago, not a life I had lived. One Saturday, I stood in front of my closet now filled with skirts, blouses, sweaters, dresses, each piece carefully chosen with Lily, or my sister, or my mom, and I realized something profound. This wasn't just dressing up anymore. This was building a life, a future, one where Emily wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. I ran my fingers over the fabrics, smiling as I thought of how far I had come from that single dare. The suspense of what lay ahead still lingered: university applications, future jobs, extended family who didn't yet know, but instead of drowning me in fear, those questions now felt like mountains I could climb one at a time. Because I wasn't alone. I had my sister, my mom, my dad, in his quiet way, Lily, who had started all of this. And most importantly, I had myself. The dare that began as a game had become the truth of my life, and though I didn't know exactly where the path would lead, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I didn't want to go back, because Emily wasn't a mask, she wasn't a costume, she was me, and at last, I was ready to live. The weeks kept rolling forward, and the more I settled into Emily, the more natural it felt. It wasn't an act anymore. I didn't think about how to move my hands or tilt my voice. It just happened, like my body and my mind had been waiting for this rhythm all along. The boy I used to be became like a dream, blurry around the edges, fading more each day, and every time someone called me Emily, I felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. But even with that comfort came the lingering tension of the outside world. I hadn't yet told the rest of my family, my relatives who visited sometimes with sharp eyes and heavy expectations. I knew that day was coming, and part of me wanted to run from it while another part of me longed for the freedom of no more secrets. The moment arrived sooner than I expected. One evening, my aunt and uncle came over for dinner. I had been upstairs in my room, wearing one of my usual outfits, a soft cream blouse with a skirt, when my mom knocked and whispered, "They're here. Do you want to stay as Emily or change?" I froze, every muscle in me screaming to hide, but then something inside whispered, "No more running." So I nodded and said, "I'll stay as me." Walking down those stairs felt like walking into fire. My uncle's eyes widened, my aunt's mouth parted, but before I could say a word, my mom placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "This is my daughter, Emily." Silence filled the room, so heavy it felt like I would collapse under it, but then my aunt simply said softly, "She's lovely," and smiled. My uncle looked confused, unsure, but he didn't argue, and just like that I realized the world didn't end, the earth didn't crack beneath me. Sometimes people surprise you with kindness you didn't expect. The next big step came at school when my teacher asked if I wanted to talk to the principal about updating my records. I hesitated, fear clawing at me, but I knew it was time. Sitting in that office with the principal across from me, I explained haltingly that I wanted to be called Emily on everything. He listened, nodded, and said, "We'll make sure your teachers respect that." It was so simple, so matter of fact, but to me it felt like the ground shifting, the school itself acknowledging me, not as a joke, not as a dare, but as who I truly was. Through it all, Lily stayed by my side, reminding me to celebrate the victories instead of only fearing the next hurdle. One afternoon, she dragged me out for ice cream, and when I asked why, she said, "Because you deserve to taste the sweetness of being you," and I laughed. But as we sat in the sun laughing with sticky hands, I realized she was right. This wasn't only about survival, it was about joy. The turning point, though, came one quiet night alone in my room. I sat at my desk staring into the mirror, hair falling around my shoulders, makeup wiped away, but still undeniably me. I whispered the name Emily, and for the first time it didn't feel borrowed or fragile. It felt whole, it felt true, and I realized I didn't need to keep asking myself if I would go back, because the answer was already written in my reflection. I wasn't going back. The next morning I woke up with a strange calm. I dressed in a simple skirt and sweater, packed my bag, and walked out the door. No hesitation, no second guessing. When people greeted me as Emily, I smiled without flinching. When teachers said my name, it rang clear and real. When my friends waved me over, it felt natural, as if it had always been this way. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought back to the very beginning, to the laughter in Lily's apartment, to the dare that had seemed like nothing more than a silly challenge, 24 hours of pretending, but those hours had unlocked something inside me, something I could never close again. She dared me to be a girl for a day, and in doing so, she handed me the key to my real self. And now, as I breathe in the quiet darkness of my room, I know this is not a costume, not a mask, not a performance. It is life, it is mine. And I do not want to go back, not for a day, not for an hour, not ever. Because Emily is not who I became, she is who I have always been. And at last, I am finally free to live as her.